Hello all, it's James Johnson, aka Sulfur Blade, and I'm just here to talk about another lie that Kamala Harris made during the vice presidential debates. I've already gone over the fracking issue, but I wanted to touch on this one because, in my opinion, it was a particularly egregious lie, and the reason I say that is because she willfully took a historical context and tried to false frame it into a new narrative, and that is, well, really a particularly egregious thing to do, especially when it involves someone as important in our history as Abraham Lincoln. So let's go ahead and watch this clip where she tries to false frame this story.
One of the, I think, political heroes, certainly of the president, I assume if you also, Mr. Vice President, is Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln was up for re-election, and it was 27 days before the election, and a seat became open on the United States Supreme Court. Abraham Lincoln's party was in charge not only of the White House, but the Senate. But Honest Abe said it's not the right thing to do. The American people deserve to make the decision about who will be the next president of the United States, and then that person can select who will serve for a lifetime on the highest court of our land.
So she says Honest Abe said she basically implied that Honest Abe said that we needed to wait for the election to end so that voters could weigh in on the choosing of the new Supreme Court justice, which just happens to fit the current political narrative and is just a bunch of shit. And here's why it's a bunch of shit. Because the Senate was not actually in session. Back in 1864, you didn't have airplanes. You didn't have high-speed trains. You didn't have cars. You didn't have the ability to travel about this country with ease to allow Congress to quickly jump back into session whenever it would possibly be needed to do so in order to act on certain things, like, for instance, voting on the new nominee for the Supreme Court. The Senate went out of session on July 4th of that year. It didn't reconvene until December 5th, and that was pretty standard back then. Senate was not in Washington year-round. The Senate was in Washington while it was in session, and it simply was not in session when this Supreme Court nomination was open. But you can bet your money that as soon as the Senate was back in session, which just happened to be, only a few days after President Lincoln won re-election, that he then nominated a new Supreme Court justice. But, that doesn't fit the narrative she's trying to paint. Now let's go ahead and look at Snopes, who are fact-checking what she said, because Snopes lays out the history fairly well. So Abraham Lincoln declined to make a Supreme Court nomination just before the 1864 election because he felt the American people deserved to make the decision. And Snopes says this is false. Okay, on October 12, 1864, Roger B. Taney, the Chief Justice of the U.S. Supreme Court, passed away at age of 87, thereby creating an opening on the bench just 4 weeks before the United States was set to hold a presidential election in the middle of a civil war. Lincoln didn't move to nominate Taney's replacement right away, but instead waited until a month after the election. Of course, of events that 2020 Democratic vice presidential nominee Kamala Harris attributes to Lincoln's supposed viewpoint that filling a vacant Supreme Court seat just before election was not the right thing to do, One could search in vain for evidence of Lincoln having either expressed or acted upon this sentiment. However, although Lincoln could have nominated a nominee prior to the 1864 election, he could not have filled the open Supreme Court seat prior to that event. When Taney died, Congress had been in recess since July 4th and would not reconvene until December 5th, so Lincoln had no opportunity to designate a successor and have that person confirmed by the Senate prior to the November 8th presidential election. More important, though, was the event in the midst of the Civil War. Lincoln had to manage a fractious coalition of quarreling politicians and competing interests, including radical Republicans and war Democrats, while seeking to secure re-election, successfully bring the war to close, and plan for unification with the rebellious Confederate States. In order to secure the support of war Democrats and others who would not vote for the Republicans, Lincoln ran in 1864 on the ticket of the National Union Party with the Southern Democrat Andrew Johnson as his vice presidential running mate, while facing a challenge in the general election from George B. McClellan, the U.S. Army general who Lincoln had first removed as commanding general of the U.S. Army in March of 1862, and then relieved from command of the Army of the Potomac on November 1862. And amidst that election year, Secretary of the Treasury Salmon P. Chase, who himself had designs on the presidency, resigned from Lincoln's cabinet in June. That last point was key. By delaying the announcement of his Supreme Court choice until after the election, Lincoln could use the opening as a lure to secure the support of those whom he needed to campaign on his behalf and help him govern the post-war nation, primarily Chase and his radical Republican supporters. As ever, Lincoln was a shrewd politician, and in October of 1864 he saw no profit in alienating any of the factions of his political support by making a selection before the election. There is no evidence that he seriously considered announcing his choice before he was reelected. Lincoln was not, however, above the use of enticement of the office to encourage campaign on his behalf. The highest prize in that regard was the active political support of Salmon P. Chase, the former senator, governor, Secretary of Treasury, and presidential candidate, and towering figure in the country. In the apt analysis of historian David Donald after Taney's death in October 1864, Chase took the cue and stumped for Lincoln throughout the Midwest, in marked contrast to his earlier maneuverings in 1864 to replace Lincoln as president. When Congress reconvened a month after Lincoln's reelection, Lincoln promptly sent Chase's name to the Senate as his new nominee to the Supreme Court. Chase was confirmed a week later, and he served as the 6th Chief Justice of the United States until his death in 1873. So that's the real truth behind Lincoln's nomination to the Supreme Court. Why he may have put it off a little bit, so that he could get one of his primary threats to his reelection pacified by basically taking that threat and nominating him to the Supreme Court, which was a fairly shrewd political move. But Abraham Lincoln certainly in no way ever uttered the words that Kamala Harris attempted to make the American people believe, thus misleading the American people about someone of fairly important historical stature for our country. Anyway, I'm James Johnson, aka Sulfur Blade. This is my content. If you're enjoying it, please leave a like and subscribe. And until the next time, all, peace.